Hello and welcome to episode 11 of the Survival Handbook. Today I'm giving you 9 tips on how to thrive in the mid-game. Each topic in this video will be broken down into detail in later videos, so today we'll be giving you a general idea of each concept and what to expect in later videos. Don't worry though, you'll get a lot of value out of this video, I promise. I'm really excited to share these tips with you, so if you want to learn how to grow your skills and all sorts of other ARK-related stuff, subscribe now so you don't miss anything. So the first thing we'll need to talk about when describing mid-game is the resources you'll need. This can vary from map to map, but on a general level, you're going to need obsidian, crystal, silica pearls, and the most cementing paste you've ever seen in your life. You're going to run into so many items that need electronics, polymer, and cementing paste that you may end up feeling like you can just never have enough of these resources. Honestly, you're right, you can't have enough of these resources. These resources are so valuable that just when you think you have enough of them, you're out and have to farm them again. This could be made a bit easier depending on what map you're playing on. For example, Extinction is basically the king of crystal and electronics, while Ragnarok is basically the king of cementing paste. I think each map has a resource that's bottlenecked, at least to some degree, and it makes the game more enjoyable if you ask me. It's up to you to determine which resource is really hard to accumulate on the map you're playing on, but hopefully I'll be able to make it a bit easier for you. In order to keep this video at a decent length, I won't be going super in depth here, but Beelzebub foes turn chitin into cementing paste, Achatinas produce Achatina paste, which is the equivalent of cementing paste, and Tech Dinos drop electronics and element dust that you can slowly accumulate into something you can actually use. We'll be talking about this a lot more in depth in a future video, so let's move on. The next thing I want to share with you is how to gather resources as efficiently as possible. As many of you know, there are creatures that hold certain resources at a reduced weight. These creatures include the Doedicurus and Ankylosaurus, which I recommend every single player has readily available in order to make the most of their time on the Ark. The Ankylosaurus in particular takes raw metal at a 75% weight reduction, meaning it can gather 4 times the amount of metal as you for the exact same weight load. Not only do certain creatures take resources for reduced weight, there are creatures that can simply gather more materials per swing than a survivor. These types of creatures are all over the place and handle so many different aspects of resource gathering that you would probably be shocked. I'll share loads of these dinos with you in a future video, so let's move on to tip number 3. The third tip I have for you is really just kind of general information about what you'll find when you end up in mid-game. You'll end up with items like generators, fabricators, shotguns, and more, but what's important about mid-game is that you're looking for loot drops as you progress. Loot drops will give you loads of good gear, but mainly what you're looking for is upgraded blueprints for tools and weapons. The difference between a primitive shotgun and an ascendant shotgun is staggering, and you'll want to do everything you can to get your hands on some of this upgraded gear. Mid-game isn't just about loot drops and upgraded gear though, it's about finding new ways to solve problems since you have access to many more craftable items than you've ever had before. People are often surprised when I tame an RG with a ballista turret and some chain bolas, but that's what I love so much about mid-game. You can do almost everything in the game at this point, and there are so many different options available to you that if you can imagine it, you can almost definitely do it. I recommend taking a few minutes of time to slowly scroll through your engram list and find out what each item is and what it does, so that you have a really good understanding of the options available to you later on. As I've said at the end of every tip so far, we'll be going over this really in depth in a later video, so let's move on. The next thing I want to talk about today is how electricity works. When I first started Ark, I was pretty terrified of electricity since it seemed like there were so many components required in order for it to power things. I had no idea that refrigerators would automatically connect to power outlets and that generators ran on gas, let alone how to even make gas. If that just raised a question in your mind, you make gas by combining hide and oil in a forge, and that's actually a really important item for you if you've just broken into mid-game. Gas is an interestingly central focus in mid-game since all of your industrial items require it to run. This includes industrial cookers, industrial forges, fabricators, chemistry benches, and so on. There are also windmills you can use that utilize the power of wind instead of gas, but I find them to be extremely unreliable. Basically, electricity works just like irrigation if you've ever set up your own farms or anything. The next topic I want to touch on today is how to use turrets, how to place them, where to place them, and what turrets you need. I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not a PvP expert. However, I do have enough experience to tell you precisely how they work and everything you need to know to get them set up properly. Turrets run on electricity, and since turrets are primarily used for base defense, you have to think about protecting your electrical connections to the turret just as much as you have to think about the turret placement. Not only that, but you have to worry about what type of turret to place. To keep this simple and to the point, don't waste your time with auto turrets. Anyone with good flak and maybe even some beer can just soak your turrets quickly and get easy loot. You want heavy turrets. They're 4 times more effective than an auto turret and will do a lot more for your base than auto turrets as well. When it comes to turret placement, you have to remember that turrets can fire a full 360 degrees around them, as well as firing upwards and downwards. This means that you need as few restrictions to their line of fire as possible in order to give you the best chance of taking down their target. This leads people to making turret towers full of hatch frames where the turret is placed on a little corner, essentially to give the turret as much space as possible to fire. The next thing I want to talk about today is custom recipes, farms, and kibble. These 3 items go hand in hand, and now that you've made it to mid-game, I'd recommend learning about these things. Custom recipes are a really great way to keep your food and water bars full for as long as possible, as well as poisoning foes and many other things. In order to make a custom recipe, you need a cooking pot or industrial cooker, a note, and some ingredients that you want to put in the recipe. The reason I mention farms is because you can use some of the fruits and vegetables grown there to drastically increase the amount of boosts you get from utilizing the custom recipes. And of course, it's pretty hard to make kibble without farms, so the 3 of these together will give you many benefits as a survivor and will help make life tremendously easier. You can't have kibble without farms, and custom recipes are just easier with loads of food at your disposal. So I recommend jumping onto your server right now and starting up a greenhouse so you can get those fruits and veggies as quickly as possible. Don't worry guys, I know this tip has been brief, but we'll be talking about superfoods, how to make your custom recipes more effective, and if you want to learn more about kibble, here's a video. The next tip on the list is some of the best dinos you can get for mid-game. Of course, I can't make this whole video about 10 dinos you need for mid-game, but I'll have a video dedicated to this topic. However, I can tell you what you should look for when you're trying to find dinos that can help you in mid-game. Something I always do when I'm in mid-game is basically tame the scariest dinos around. One of my favorites is a Uranus because of its debuff to non-allied dinos and its buff to allied dinos. Utis are really good to get in the mid-game because you're gonna need them for late game. Of course, scary dinos are good to get, but there are loads of creatures out there. Which is right for you? Well, you should look at creatures that can make resource gathering easier, or creatures that can produce resources autonomously. The gacha is a really good example of this. However, many gachas can be entirely useless if I'm honest. It might even be in your best interest to start breeding tech dinos so you can kill the babies and farm its resources. All of this will be elaborated on in extreme detail later, so for now we're gonna move on. The next thing I want to touch on today is artifacts and how the obelisks work. In order to beat any bosses, you need to collect artifacts that are strewn about the map in usually very dangerous caves. You'll need to use these artifacts as a sacrifice in an obelisk in order to trigger the teleportation to the boss arena where you can begin fighting. The artifacts can be elusive on maps like Ragnarok, where you have to complete a series of puzzles in order to get your hands on a few artifacts. Or they could be pretty easy too, where you just have to navigate to its spawn location and grab it. Since caves are so different on every map and the required artifacts are different for the bosses you may want to engage with, I can't give you specific locations for every map in this video. However, you can find what artifacts you need as well as what trophies you'll need to sacrifice by either looking in the tribute tab of an obelisk or going to my favorite place on the internet, the Ark Wiki. Understand that you'll be running into some pretty scary stuff in some of the caves you'll find, so I recommend being as prepared as possible for them. I have a video on caving popping up right now. The last tip I have for you today is about how to prepare yourself for endgame. Essentially, endgame is all about tech gear, super dinos, crazy loot, and beating bosses, so there are a lot of things you'll need to think about before you get there. Find out what bosses you'll be fighting on the map you're on by doing a quick Google search, then formulate a plan to beat it. This almost always means you'll need to form a party of high health and high melee dinos like the Rex. For general use, I always recommend a party of like 17 or 18 Rexes, a Uranus, and 1 or 2 Daedons. There's a lot more to endgame than just fighting bosses though, like how tech structures work, what tech items are available to you, which difficulty of boss unlocks which tech item, and so on. There are also some endgame dinos that'll be a lot of fun for you once you finally reach it as well. As a general bit of advice for you though, I do recommend you start getting yourself a nice collection of Rexes, hopefully with some stat mutations on their melee damage or health. If you want to learn more about the Ark, click on the video on the left. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video if you haven't already. And as always, thank you so much for your time today. We'll see you in the next video.